we map it, it sounds like, I had these kind of milestone things I wanted to try to do, like, say, train with Dr. Roxon, or prior to coming to Stanford, I was in medical school. Those types of things were like thoughts, but I had a ton of fun moving through those phases of life. Obviously, the first situation of like the cancer diagnosis and lymphedema, that was tough, but we still were kind of learning new ways of going through life as a family. And things that definitely worked, things that didn't. I think a cute example is like I used to come home from school and my mom would be resting her lymphedema leg, and I would come upstairs and we would watch Oprah and have popcorn and smoothies. I'm Catharine Bowman. I'm a member of the 2022 cohort and a third-year PhD candidate in epidemiology and clinical research. I imagine a world where no patient living with a lymphatic disease is left without a diagnosis or adequate treatment.
Welcome to the Imagine a World podcast from Knight-Hennessy Scholars. We are here to give you a glimpse into the Knight-Hennessy scholar community of graduate students, spanning all 7 Stanford schools, including business, education, engineering, humanities, law, medicine, and sustainability. In each episode, we talk with scholars about the world they imagine and what they are doing to bring it to life.
Today, we've got Catharine Bowman, a third-year PhD candidate in epidemiology and clinical research. During our conversation, you'll hear Catharine discuss her journey west from Dundas to Palo Alto, the life-changing moment that led her to dedicate her career to curing lymphedema, how she had fun along the way, and so much more. Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Imagine a World podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Willie Thompson, 2022 cohort at the ed school right now after finishing 2 years at the business school. And I am joined, as always, by a new co-host this time in Max Dew. Actually, Max, do you want to introduce yourself? Go for it.
Yeah, hey, y'all. This is Max Dew. I'm 2024 cohort. I study computer science. I'm a PhD student.
Awesome. And today, what word can I use? Honor, pleasure, privilege.
Wow.
Yeah, privilege
Thank
of
you.
having truly, actually, and I will say this now, one of the most impressive people that I know in life. No, seriously, impressive. You know, what's interesting is it's not just the impressive part, it's the fact that you're not intimidating either. It's like the balance of like not intimidating and impressive.
Thanks, Willie.
Yeah, we got Catharine Bowman on the pod today.
Hi, everybody.
So look, we have so much to talk about. Actually, before we get into the nitty gritty of the conversation, how you doing? It's a Friday, sunny outside. How you feeling?
Doing well. I'm doing well. The sun is shining. It's nice and warm. Had a wonderful bike ride in today.
Okay.
Cannot complain.
So you're biking from home. So you live off campus. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, over in Menlo Park.
Nice. Very cool. Well, we have so much to discuss. And thinking about your Imagine a World statement, actually, there's something about it that is very, I feel like, unique relative to a lot of other Imagine a World statements, where a lot of them I find are very broad, which we love and we welcome. Yours is like very specific. Yeah. And so we will get to like the specificity, what's driving the specificity behind that statement. But before we talk about the world you imagine, the very specific world you imagine, let's talk about the world you're born into. So what was your journey here to Stanford?
So I can probably start that kind of way back. So I grew up in Dundas, Ontario in Canada, and I had a wonderful childhood. I have 3 older brothers, and my parents were in Dundas with us. And I had that great childhood. Things started to get, a little bit different. Some family members were diagnosed with cancer, my grandparents, and immediately after, my parents as well. And so my parents both had melanoma when I was a kid. My mom went through her treatment, and as a result of her treatment, ended up developing this lifelong incurable disease called lymphedema, which starts to kind of get at what brought me to Stanford, as well as my Imagine a World statement. Seeing my mom's life change and our family context really shift with this new diagnosis, I made a promise that is really the pipeline of what brought me here. I said, "Mom, I'm going to cure you or treat you one day." We can kind of get into it more, but as a teenager, I started to actualize that promise and try to pick away at the iceberg. And through my years as a teen, I met a lymphatic clinician and researcher here at Stanford, Dr. Stanley Roxon. And I remember meeting him, I think in Chicago, and saying, "I want to work for you one day." And I was, I think, 15. And he said, "If you can get into Stanford and make your way over, I would be happy to have you." And so 10 years later, I'm here working with him on my thesis work focused on lymphedema, how we can improve treatment and diagnosis.
So you grew up with 3 older brothers. You were the youngest child?
Yes.
What was that like?
It was great. Yeah, my brothers are wonderful.
What are their names?
So Jordan, Patrick, and David, big shout out. And then they all have wonderful partners as well. Really close family, but also like pushed each other to go beyond. So I think a great example is like most of my brothers are kind of 6-foot-ish and I'm 5'2", but I absolutely was right up with them playing hockey and basketball and trying to like be a little bit like my older brothers and give them a bit of a challenge. So it was like a playful type of competition in the house, but everybody is also really proud of each other. So there's a lot of like warmth and growth.
Yeah. I mean, as the youngest child, could you get away with a lot more because you were the youngest child?
You could ask my mom. I really don't know. Or the brothers. They might say yes. I tried not to do that, but like, I don't know. You'd have to ask the guys. They would have a good answer for you. Yeah.
Might do a families episode of the podcast where we just bring people's families and we just...
That'd be so fun. The guys would be right here. They're like, yeah, I'm in.
Let me tell you a story.
Awesome. Well, look, I want to talk a little bit, but before we get more into the research and work you're doing here at Stanford, this goes back to again, I know I said this at the top of the pod, impressive and not intimidating, amazing balance that Catharine strikes. Okay, so you have this moment when your parents are both diagnosed with cancer. You decide at that moment you're going to treat your mother of lymphedema, incurable disease. Remind the audience how old you were when you said that.
I would have been 8.
8.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, from 8 to, and by my math, 10 years ago, you talked to the guy, you're 25, all that stuff. Chart the journey from like 8 to 25 and the amount of, I might intuit like focus required to sort of like, to chart that path and how you seemingly went from Dundas to Calgary to California. You just keep going west. I don't know if you're going any further west.
Further. Yeah.
But yeah, just talk about that journey and just like mapping that path from like, 8, 15, 25 and just getting to here because it's remarkable.
Thank you. Yeah. It was a ton of fun. And I think that's like, when we map it, it sounds like, yes, I had these kind of milestone things I wanted to try to do, like say train with Dr. Roxon, or prior to coming to Stanford, I was in medical school. Those types of things were like thoughts, but I had a ton of fun moving through those phases of life. Obviously, the first situation of like the cancer diagnosis and lymphedema, that was tough, but we still were kind of learning new ways of going through life as a family. And things that definitely worked, things that didn't. I think a cute example is like I used to come home from school and my mom would be resting her lymphedema leg and I would come upstairs and we would watch Oprah and have popcorn and smoothies, right? And I made that promise to her, but I also used something like science fair projects as a way to actualize moving through that promise and that trajectory to here. So I would start reading, research articles and stuff like that and ask my mom, she used to, be a palliative care nurse, what does this word mean? And it became this kind of like bonding journey for the two of us and moving through that. And then I started doing these research projects. I was writing proposals that I actually really enjoyed writing. Science communication became a big theme of my teen years, and collaborating with senior investigators, with other grad students when I was still in high school, where I could go home at the end of my school day and then off to the lab. And it just became this actually really fun extracurricular activity. And it followed a line. The more that I learned, the more the path, I think, became a little bit more clear. Going over to Calgary, I moved when I was in grade 10. So I'd written a proposal, started working at, I think, McMaster University in Ontario on a bit of a side project. Not a lot of people work in lymphatics. So I was working on kind of immune function and some compounds I had identified to try to treat lymphedema. And then through that, an offer came to intern basically at the University of Calgary. Moved out there for a summer with my mom, and we got to like explore the mountains while I was also doing science. That became my undergrad and my medical school home. And similar to coming here, this opportunity to work with Dr. Roxon has also come with a lot of joy and wonder has been a primary theme, just finding wonder in what we are doing. There are like mundane days where you might be doing the same math or statistics or something like that. But when you look at the big picture, what a wonderful trajectory and experience to just be able to live.
Absolutely. And I feel as if we're transitioning into the specifics around the research and everything. Just for folks who are listening, I'm taking 2 med school classes right now, and we're talking about this in Denning the other day. The recall of medical students is ridiculous.
It's fun.
It is fun. It is fun. A lot of packed in the brain there. Can you define for folks who are listening, what's melanoma, what's lymphedema?
Yeah.
And, I learned a lot about the immune system just, hearing you talk about it. But I just want to, for folks who might not be familiar with just defining melanoma and lymphedema and sort of how that manifests in patients.
Yeah. So melanoma is a form of skin cancer. In the case of, there's a couple of things that characterize it, but oftentimes we might think of, there's this kind of sinister looking mole on the skin, and that can transform into actually quite an aggressive form of cancer if it's not caught early. In the case of, say, my mom and other patients who might develop this lymphedema that I'll describe, the melanoma metastasized. So that meant that it went from the skin and it started to move through the body and moved, in her case, to lymph nodes, which is part of our lymphatic system. Lymphatic system is that immune system that helps us to fight off infection or to flag like, hey, we have cancer or something going on. And the lymph nodes that this cancer likes to go to are almost like the schools of the immune system, where like you might see a bacteria or a cancer, and then the cell will come back to the lymph node school and tell all the students, hey, we gotta go fix that. And then our lymph nodes send out a bunch of immune cells through lymphatic vessel highways to go and attack that infection or that threat to the body. So that's kind of melanoma. The immune system, the lymphatic system, as I mentioned, is a big part of that immune function. It's a set of vessels, and then these lymph nodes and a couple other organs in the body, like the spleen, for example, really geared towards keeping us safe from immune invasion, balancing fluid in our body. So if you think about like, hey, I stubbed my toe on a door, that swelling and that redness, your lymphatic system is like, hey, we got a problem here, brings a bunch of immune cells, we do all the fixing, and then it takes the fluid away with all the debris. And then it also helps with like moving what's called adipose tissue or fatty tissue throughout the body as well. So there's kind of 3 big things on lymphatics. Lymphedema is when we have a damage to that lymphatic system, and we start to see accumulation of lymphatic fluid from those vessels kind of leaking into a particular part of the body. Think about like a straw that's filled with water. You cut it in half. So, maybe you have surgery to a lymph node and you take that out. We now have a disconnected lymphatic system that's leaking lymphatic fluid. So we see patients who have lifelong swelling of a particular limb or part of their body. We see the lesser ability to fight infections in quite the same way because that immune function is damaged. And then we also see kind of this adipose or fatty tissue starting to develop a lot more in a lymphedema limb than if you had an intact lymphatic system. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and before we go really deep into lymphedema and all the research you're doing, something that you said really struck me is that you lived your life in these different stages, and you were only 8 years old when your mom was diagnosed. And one thing that just really raises, a lot of curiosity for me is like, at that age, you're really just defining your relationship with your mom, and you had this giant thing kind of drop into your life. And I'm very curious that, how did having this diagnosis evolve your relationship with your mom?
Awesome question. My relationship with my mom has always been very close, but I think this lymphedema diagnosis and the research also brought like a really cool intellectual closeness as well. So she, again, was a palliative care nurse, so worked in healthcare. And as I started through this research, we started to have almost like a journal club. I think I learned how my mom's intellectual side worked in a really different and cool way. And I started to also see like parts of myself in her and her in myself. So I think there was this kind of fun that we could have together by learning from each other in a lot of ways. And, I think this is also because the work has been inspired by her lymphedema. She will always be with me through that. And what a gift that actually is to be able to carry my mom, with me, and all of the lessons and the love that she has given to me, and actually pump all of that into science to help other people. She once said to me when I was in med school, she said, "Catharine, I have watched you completely and wholeheartedly fall in love with humanity." And I think because of her involvement in the early stages of my research and how I view, say, the healthcare system and the giving practice, that complete and wholehearted love for humanity is really a manifestation of how she completely and wholeheartedly loves me, if I can put it that way. So,
Say more about how you fell in love with humanity through your studies.
Yeah. So I think through my research, I started meeting families of people, who had, say, young kids with lymphedema, kind of the genetic form of lymphedema, all the way up to folks who are older in age. And I just realized that we are all moving through life in different contexts. And whether or not we ask for those contexts, I think doesn't matter. We just need to be able to humbly approach each other and offer kindness and love. And so falling in love with humanity is my way of putting this unconditional love approach to the world and seeing that just being kind to people makes such a difference in our day-to-day. Showing love to people can make such a difference. And the more we pump that into the world, I think the better off we all are, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. It's so interesting. You're so humble. You're so humble, Catherine. You're so humble. You're humble. You were doing this in your teenage years, and you were the youngest person to establish a national research effort to improve the diagnosis and treatment of lymphedema. So that's in and of itself, like I said, impressive. That's going to be one of the words I probably keep coming back to. And something you said also unlocked something for me. I want to get your thoughts on it. This idea of doing it at such a young age and how it influenced your ability to do the work maybe differently than someone who's a little bit older, right? Like in what ways do you think you're talking about joy and wonder, you're talking about, being younger in your life. What do you think was different about your ability to draw out insights and research at that age?
Yeah, I think there was a childlike openness to the world. And I guess I wasn't sticking myself into any sort of box. And I try not to do it now. I try to keep that childlike wonder, but
hard, right?
The world definitely likes to put us in boxes. And I think as a kid, it was something I could do that was fun and hopefully would be helpful. And I had the time and the space, and honestly, a team that really mentored me and supported me in being able to accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish. So I think it was a lot of openness and excitement for discovery, seeing wonder in the opportunity in front of me. A lot of those things as a kid were kind of at the forefront, and now really trying to carry that forward as an adult and share that with other people was a big thing. I also feel like watching my grandparents pass away from cancer and then my parents' diagnosis, there was this feeling of, from an early age, what a gift it is to be able to have time with each other, as humans, and to breathe air and to live life. And really being able to see that as a gift and not let go of that helps each day feel exciting, wonderful, joyful, even on the bad days. So maybe not always joyful, but worth it.
So what I'm getting from that is that by seeing people around you having these conditions, you have a better appreciation for life as it's going through. And one of the things that naturally comes up for me is that cancer is hereditary. And if your parents have it, if your grandparents have it, have you ever thought that you might have susceptibility to this in the future? And how does that impact you in your research?
Definitely. Yeah. I also get my checks just in case, it's a skin cancer, right? So, but that feeling of, hey, this might be coming for me, just honestly builds more into what we were discussing with make every day count and see how special each day is, because you don't know when things might change. When I was 8, definitely didn't see that one coming. I remember we actually had Suleika Jawad come and speak with us last year as part of Knight-Hennessy, and I interviewed her. And she talked about this porous line between health and illness and how
a little bit of context on who she is.
Yeah. So she's a New York Times bestselling author. She wrote Between Two Kingdoms, and that kind of tracks the journey of her young adult cancer diagnosis. And then when she kind of, after that, went throughout the United States and started to meet with other folks who had experienced cancer or other things in life and talk to them about life. And speaking with her, she talked about that porous line between health and illness. And I think that is a really solid way of articulating the human experience. We really don't know how much time we have. We don't know what that time will look like. So if we can lean into today in its fullness, I think that's all we can do sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to the work that you're doing here at Stanford, there's a couple questions that come to mind. One is, I know when we first started at Knight-Hennessy, you initially were doing the MS in epidemiology, and now the PhD's been tacked on. Would love to get your take on adding the PhD. Was it from? Because I know sometimes people sort of see the profiles of people in the community and say, oh, like they may not see that change. And then they'll just sort of start like backwards mapping, like, oh, of course, like the PhD and all that sort of stuff. So we'll love to get your thoughts on that. And then my second question, I'll hold on my second question for now, but we'll just get through that real quick. And then I have just a quick follow-up.
Cool. So I first was coming out of, I was in, I think the last 10 months of medical school. And I knew I just felt like I needed more kind of numeric quantitative methods. I hadn't done a ton of epidemiology work before. And so part of my choice of like, hey, I should do the master's as opposed to going fully to a PhD is I wasn't sure if I was going to be kind of dragging my boots. I'm very much a qualitative person. So I was like, oh, if I am doing 4 to 6 years of PhD numbers, maybe I'm going to be miserable. So it was a little bit like, I think I'm going to try this out. And also knowing later in life, maybe I would add a PhD if I really liked it, or I felt like I needed additional training. I also, again, was working on my MD, and you see a lot of MDs who have a master's in epi because you get the start of those skills, those quant skills. So I came, and then I was sitting in biostatistics, and I loved it. And that blew my mind because I was not expecting that. I had a wonderful professor, Dr. Kristen Sanani. She's a scholarly writer, also writes for, I think it's Washington Post. So excellent communicator and brilliant biostatistician. And things started to make a lot more sense in terms of how to execute biostats. And so I think that was one of the first clicks of like, oh, I'm actually enjoying doing this and I'd love to keep going. The other side of things was, I was maybe 6 months into my master's and had just kind of been getting going on some of the work with Dr. Roxon. And I realized how short 2 years of a master's was going to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Goes by quickly.
Yeah. And I had a lot, I had so many more questions scientifically that I wanted to ask. I had so many questions as a student of his to ask and learn. And so it was just this curiosity, this enjoyment of learning, I think that really sent me into the space of considering a PhD. I also loved the community. I mean, you both know it. Knight-Hennessy, the greater Stanford community, what a cool group of people to be able to connect with and build out friendships, professional relationships with. And so it felt like it was going to be it would be done so quickly. And so, yeah, those were kind of the factors that I was considering. And knowing that if I were to do additional graduate training, like a PhD, I'm also so excited to go back to medicine. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't necessarily be something that I would want to drag on and on and on.
Right.
I had something that also would be motivating to really push through that extra graduate training as opposed to, letting it space out.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have one more year of med school when you go back to Canada, right? Okay,
Yeah,
got it. Yeah. And what are some of the challenges with addressing both the diagnosis and treatment aspects of folks with lymphedema?
Yeah.
Or lymphatic diseases? Definitely.
So I think a couple of things so that it's twofold is how I'm going to answer that question. In terms of diagnosis, I think a lot of the medical system is unfamiliar with lymphedema and lymphatic diseases. I have a myriad of reasons why that may be / is, but part of it is we need to get more education out earlier on, I think, in medical education so that physicians can recognize it. And then the latter half of that is treatment. A couple of things. So where we are sending patients for their treatment, some docs, are not as familiar with it, or allied health professionals. The types of treatments we have are very kind of what I call palliative or symptom-based. So in the case of, say my mom's lymphedema, these are full like really tight compression garments that are going up on her, it's on her full leg and kind of squeezing the lymphatic system so that it keeps pumping lymphatic fluid. But you can imagine like in the middle of the heat of the summer,
Right.
or as someone is like a little kid with genetic lymphedema versus also someone who is, in their 80s or 90s with lymphedema, that's a really hard thing to get on and get off. It restricts your mobility. So I think our treatments need some expansion. Not all docs know how to set up that compression, kind of insurance coverage, things like that, depending on the country. Like those are challenges for the treatment side of things. But I really do think that like our understanding of the lymphatic system and when things go wrong, i.e. lymphatic disease, that needs to be built a lot more for us to really get people a diagnosis and adequate treatment, which is part of what I study in addition to these kind of applied treatments. I'm also like, hey, what does happen when lymphedema manifests? We know it affects quality of life for sure, but are there other things like why do people get these infections like over and over? Are there other things that lymphedema might affect from a physical, biomedical standpoint in addition to quality of life?
What you just said about there not being enough knowledge or awareness of lymphedema is very interesting to me, especially because it seems like it's not a trivial condition to have. And a lot of people have it, right? And it's why do you think that not enough people, doctors, the public know about this? When I read lymphedema, I'm like, I don't know what that is. Is there a reason why?
Yeah. So, part of it is our team works on some educational reform. So getting it into curricula is really important. Being able to formulate what's called a differential diagnosis. So this is med school 101. When you see a patient presenting with, say, swelling in their arm, like lymphedema, you need to be able to think about, or say swelling in their legs, that's a good example. Is this something like congestive heart failure? Is it a heart issue? Is there something with the lungs causing all of this fluid buildup? Or is it something like lymphedema? So having a lymphatic system diagnosis actually make it into that differential.
Interesting.
So training early on in education to even consider the lymphatic system, I think is a really important thing for us. There's other challenges, I think, for, say, specifically the lymphedema patient after cancer treatment, where people have just gone through their cancer. And you see this in the literature. I've heard it within my own research, talking to patients. People feel like, well, I just had cancer and now it's gone. I should probably just be happy with this or okay with this because I'm alive. So there's this chronic disease coping and adaptation that can happen. And I think over time, that may have also slightly diminished our appreciation for the impact of this condition, psychosocially or physically. So yeah, there's a couple of different things that I think play into it. Also, historical part of me loves to look at the fact that the lymphatic system was identified at the same time as the cardiovascular system, in history. And so
it's much more on the cardiovascular system than on the lymphatic system.
And so when you look at the original writings, it's basically said there's this robust set of red vessels and they're very easier to manipulate. And then there are these very fragile little lymphatics, little milky white vessels that are hard to study. And I wonder if that bifurcation also historically might have played a role in kind of how we have studied the lymphatic system over time, because it's a very fragile system to work with.
So it's very hard to look at, it's very hard to study. Do you think that is a big contribution to why it's less known to the public and to the doctors?
I think it could be, it could be part of the story. I think there's those other factors that we discussed also. But I know even for myself, when I used to work in a wet lab, at a bench and work with the lymphatic systems.
What's a wet lab?
So wet lab is when you kind of picture a scientist and they're using tools at a science bench. There might be beakers and fluids, or you're working with mice, those types of settings. When I refer to wet lab is what I mean. So I used to work specifically with taking lymphatic vessels out of mice and then basically trying to what's called cannulate or fill them with fluid and then study how the lymphatic vessels pump. And with that, I learned how fragile they are, because if you poke it the wrong way with a set of tiny tweezers, your lymphatic smooth muscle can die. And that's the end of your experiment. Yeah.
So fragile.
Very. Yeah.
And what's giving you hope towards this world that you imagine, right? What's, whether it's your research in the field, what are some things that are giving you a reason to think that world is coming?
So a couple of things. The first is you should meet the lymphedema patients. They're amazing. They've advocated for their care throughout their trajectory, which also means when you see them educating other people or working with government to try to get better coverage for lymphedema therapies, they're very solid at advocating. And so the people have hope. That gives me hope. From a research standpoint, I think there's been some really interesting momentum within kind of plastic and reconstructive surgery, trying to use surgery as a tool to treat lymphedema. And so I think not for quite the first time, but the first time in a while, we've seen a new medical domain or specialty take lymphedema in as its own. And I think that's actually provided a lot of momentum and hope, because we see a lot of reconstructive surgeons now innovating in and around the lymphatic surgery space, which is pretty interesting. Within our own team at Stanford, seeing we have a drug trial going on right now for lymphedema and some of the other research projects, and having colleagues who are ranging like in and around kind of my level of training, there's a future that's building here. And there's a lot of excitement in that future, I think. And then I think the last piece is like, the hope never died in me when I did at 8. I still have that degree of hopefulness and wonder and excitement of, I think we can really make a difference for people one day. That's the other piece that brings me towards that hopeful statement. Yeah.
So you talk about needing to talk and interact with the lymphedema patients, and you've done a lot of that yourself. And I'm so curious, given the very personal nature of this thing for you too, like, are there stories from meeting patients that resonated with you, things that you remember?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a couple of them, the first time I met a lymphedema patient who was not my mother, that has stuck with me. And it was actually 2 parents of a little boy who had lymphedema, the genetic form of lymphedema. I think for them, it was also like a pretty new experience to just encounter somebody who knew about lymphedema in their day-to-day. It was at a science fair. And I think just the unspoken appreciation for each other was huge. And that's why that experience stuck out to me, was there was an understanding there of the number of things that a lymphedema patient has to go through that very few other people in that science fair auditorium had.
It's like a solidarity.
Yeah, it was kind of like, I see you and you see me, and that's very validating. And then there is, another experience. I think I was giving a talk in British Columbia. A patient I had met, had some tears, and we kind of exchanged some words and had a really good hug, I think, at the end of that experience. And about probably 10 years later, I was giving a talk in British Columbia again, and I saw her from a distance, and there was just a nod, and we kind of continued. So it's those moments that I guess there isn't some huge, like, monumental milestone or anything like that, but my favorite author is Joan Didion, and she talks about how the ordinary moment can become extraordinary. And I think those moments, extraordinary moments, they were just very ordinary, but there was an understanding and an exchange of energy and an appreciation for one another that really sticks with me.
Yeah, the simplicity of it is the most beautiful. It's these are just 2 lives, and you're interacting, and you kind of see each other in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
And can I have okay, this is maybe it's a little ignorant question, but, just as a U.S. citizen, American, because anyway, semantics, language. You keep bringing up science fair.
Mm-hmm.
To me, when I grew up, like, my science fair was kind of this honky donkey thing they made you do to show that you could do the scientific method.
Yeah.
Max, have you ever done a science fair?
Oh, I have.
Okay. Actually, just quick aside here. What did you do for your science fair?
I did different things. I made like little gadgets.
Okay.
I did low AI things. But you also mentioned you were at the Intel International Fair. Is that what it was?
Right.
I was also at
you were also at that fair?
Yeah, but I'm sure different.
He's done
times.
some pretty solid science fair. Okay.
Okay. All right. So
This is high standard is here.
I mean, it takes a high standard to know a high standard. All right. I've already dropped the impressive word 4 or 5 times. So clearly, you 2 have a sense of the levels that there are to, like, science fair. I feel like y'all talking about, like, the NBA of science fairs.
Specific energy.
Yeah. I feel like it's like the NBA of the, like, the National Basketball Association and my only science fair project was I tried to make a lie detector. Didn't even make it, but I tried to. Stuff. It was a cool idea, but anyway.
Good science, though.
Thank you. Well, my chemistry teacher wouldn't let us do volcanoes. She's like, that's elementary. You need to actually do something that's a topic.
Too cliche.
It's too cliche. She's like, you need to have, like, rigor to your inquiry. I was like, all right, sure, whatever.
I got a good story on that. Anyways, continue.
About volcanoes or about the lie detector test?
Volcano.
Okay, all right. Let's get
you after.
Okay, all right. You want to do it now? No. Okay,
okay.
all right, cool. We wait. So yeah, I mean, maybe y'all could just talk about this. Like, what is this? Like, sounds like an international circuit of, like, science fairs, like. Because it sounds like legit, like, because when you keep mentioning science fair initially, like when we were doing research and just talking about this, I'm like, oh yeah, like poster boards and, like, walking around, like maybe like a dingy cafeteria or something.
yeah.
But I don't think that's what y'all were doing, was it?
It's like one of those things where it's like there is that, but then it's like if you imagine someone taking it to like the next level, like that is the International Science Fair. Like, which years were you there?
2014 and 15.
What was that like?
Oh, it was wonderful.
Did you find a community there?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, yes, this whole, like, National Basketball Association of Science, or like the Kid Olympics of Science Fair, is kind of how I think of, we call it ISEF, International Science and Engineering Fair. My early projects, I will say, I think my first project was like looking as to whether a coffee filter or like a really, it was river moss was a better filter for water. And it was very backyard. Like I went to the river nearby, and then I scooped up a bunch of water and then put it through a coffee filter and put it through moss. And then I think I had like a friend who had a microscope, and maybe a friend, I ended up weighing 2 different like pieces of paper, see what had more sediment. Stuff like that were the early science fair projects.
That's really cool.
It was very fun.
Much more cool than a volcano.
Well, yeah, here's the thing about that volcano. So a couple of years later, another science fair project was, I think I looked at whether reusable grocery bags had bacterial growth, like if you didn't wash them. So I just like swabbed them. A friend of a friend, knew how to run Petri dish science stuff, taught me some things. So I did that. And through that project, I ended up being invited to partake in the world record for the largest baking soda and vinegar volcano in the world.
Okay, how did you get from A to B?
There we go.
Something here. So I think the Discovery Channel, which is kind of a big TV channel in Canada and elsewhere, I suppose, but
in the US as well. Discovery Channel.
Well.
Yep.
Wasn't sure. Yep. He was looking, Alan Rickman was the guy who kind of spearheaded this. He was looking for some youth scientists to help with this awesome project. So through the local science fair, because I think that grocery bag project ended up doing well at our local science fair.
So what did you find? Like, so, because I actually have some reusable grocery bags at the house right now, but
you should wash them.
Okay, good to know. All right,
Makes sense.
Okay, very gnarly. Okay.
A little, at least. Yeah, it was a little bit not great. And then or you could just spray them with some like antiseptic. Just be careful because there's food. Anyways, all that fun stuff.
Taking notes.
Yeah, honestly. But through the local science fair, I think I won an award. And so the Discovery Channel team reached out to that science fair, and I was one of a handful of kids. I don't know. I was like 12. And so there's this huge volcano, and then it also exploded potatoes as part of it. And then
whole potatoes? That sounds dangerous.
We had hard hats. No,
you had a hard hat. Okay, cool.
There was safety equipment.
Cool. I was thinking like mashed potatoes, but this is your basic russet from the Whole Foods aisle or Safeway or Trader Joe's, wherever you get your potatoes.
The good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyways, science fair brought me to those types of experiences, both. And then, I think when I was like grade 8 or grade 9, that's when I started thinking back to that promise that I made to my mom when I was 8. And I was like, man, I could use science fair as a platform to actually try to take a stab at this treatment for lymphedema. Started doing a bunch of reading. I read a gardening magazine. I was like eating lunch, and it talked about this like lupin flower and how they had anti-inflammatory properties. And what I had learned about lymphedema so far was, well, my mom is inflamed. This talks about anti-inflammatory. What if I put them together? And that was the big aha moment for what would send me off in like 10 to 15 years of my life now. I wrote to the guy who had written that article. He gave me a list of compounds. I started reading about them. 2 of them had some like interesting interactions with what's called chronic venous insufficiency. So it's a different disease than lymphedema, more the cardiovascular system, but had a lot of commonalities. So I picked those, and then I picked one by random. And that was the one that actually, over the course of the next 5-6 years of studying the effect of these compounds on the lymphatic system, actually had 3 really positive interactions and properties with a lymphedema-like environment. So I was writing those into my science fair projects as I went along. I did have a poster board. Okay. There was a poster board. I think by the end it was one of those like pull-up tall screens. It's getting
block
very
of text.
fancy.
Wait, you have one of those too, Max? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Max
wow. Y'all serious. I just had
we take things seriously.
Yeah, what you do. Yeah.
What year did you go?
2018, 2019.
Okay.
So Pittsburgh and Arizona.
Is it in the same location?
They
It
rotate.
changes. Where were yours?
Okay.
I was Los Angeles and Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And
Wait,
then
mine was Pittsburgh too.
Pittsburgh twice.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh's
yeah. And then I think Phoenix is the third. They started to rotate through.
Okay, just rotate through a set of cities,
yeah,
which makes
now they're
sense.
doing that. Yeah.
Probably big enough. You sort of know places where you can go for that.
I suppose. I suppose that. But yeah, science fair was like this space where kids who were interested in science and math and engineering and art as well could come together and connect. And it was a space where, unfortunately, I think through media, we are primed, or one is primed to think like, oh, science, we get this term like the nerd, and that has somehow a negative connotation. But just thinking about bringing 500 of some really smart kids together who love science, who are also unfortunately got a little used to maybe taking some of that negativity from the world about what they like and being together and celebrating each other for it. That is such a magic space. And I think that helped with like my personal self-confidence that, created some really close friendships for me in the long run. And then just further instilled that love of the scientific process and research within me. So it was really a transformative experience. Yeah.
It opens up the possibility of like connecting with fellow nerds. Like you are for so long, you're just like, oh, I am the nerd in a place where like, oh my goodness, there's like 1,000 other nerds here and we're all having fun and we're all connecting. Like that's a huge moment, right?
My hot take is I think the nerds kind of won in the long, in the long game, the nerds kind of won. I mean, it's the reason why Marvel or whatever, like all these comic book stuff is like, driving entertainment, you got fandom stuff, I think the nerds are winning long term.
I agree.
I'm long the nerds,
I'm very pro nerd as well.
Yeah.
But the thing about the science fair that is so cool to me and maybe for you is like, it is very self-directed. You're looking at this gardening magazine. You're like, oh, I have an idea. I'm going to just take this idea and do it by myself. I don't have to convince anybody else. I can just do it just self-directed, right? And this feels like something for you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I was determined no matter what to try to tackle this promise. And science fair gave me that framework, that medium, something, these milestones to work towards, whether it was a fair or a next level of competition. It was the driving, something that helped me package my drive, so to speak. And it was self-driven. I also am so grateful for the mentors who saw me for my potential and not just my age or, I would come to meetings in my high school uniform sometimes and everyone would be like, whose kid is that? And it wasn't take your kid to work day. It was just, another person at the table. And they really took me seriously and I think provided me with the supports I needed to excel and to continue that self-drive, so to speak. Yeah.
I mean, that strikes me as something that is potentially challenging is that you are the youngest person in the room. You are in your high school uniform. Did you ever feel like people were challenging that about you, that you ever felt self-conscious about that?
Yeah.
That. the high school outfit.
The kids, they were really cool. There were moments where maybe I was new to somebody and it wasn't necessarily that I felt wholly intimidated or self-conscious. It was more like, hey, I probably need to tell my story to this person so that they do know that this is a serious endeavor. And I take this now as a trainee, as a not a 14-year-old, is when someone comes to you, take them seriously. You have no idea what their background, their life has looked like. Be open and be willing to just face people with kindness and openness to help. Because that's exactly what I received. Sometimes it took a little bit of a conversation, but I think by the end of presenting my ideas or my drive or my vision, I would say most people were quite excited to work together and support the mission.
We've learned so much already. I'm going to go home and wash all my reusable bags as soon as I get home. And also that there's a professional league of scientists and nerds out there trying to solve the world's problems.
There's a documentary on it.
Really?
They showed it at the 2019.
What? Are you in the documentary?
I don't think my head was in it. No. I was looking, there's a big shot of a crowd. I was like, oh, is that my bun? But it wasn't.
Okay. So, what's the name of the documentary?
Science fair. I think it is.
Yeah, it's like super generic. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. All right, man, come on. I know the nerds are smart. We need to get some marketing people on that. That's a little too on the nose. But as we sort of wrap up our conversation here, you've already talked a lot about how being at Stanford, in some ways being at Knight-Hennessy, sort of helped you further promote the work that you're doing and get more clarity about where you want to be. Before we get into improbable facts and close out, what advice would you have for other people who are applying to Stanford and Knight-Hennessy?
So the biggest thing, and maybe others have also said this, be yourself. If you can avoid changing who you are, just be yourself. I think that's actually a really cool form of self-love, is to just lean fully into ourselves. And when you are preparing applications, this is obviously coming from just personal experience, not admissions advice by any means, but I did my best to make sure that all the aspects of who I was were being represented in these applications. And that included, say, my improbable facts, talking to my childhood best friend and being like, do you think this is me, or am I posing as XYZ? And that really, I think is the big thing I would say is just be you. And if you have folks, not everybody does, to ask those questions too. You know, I would invite that as a helpful practice for me. I also read my journal entries for 10 years of journal entries to get to know me again. Because I was in also the thick of med school, and it's busy and hard, and you are constantly like outward facing and supporting other people. So those moments of like reflection were a little less common because there was just slightly less space for it. So reading back and looking back on my life to just recenter myself also was a really wonderful practice, both for applying into Stanford / Knight-Hennessy and just kind of regrounding myself as a person.
I mean, you did find time in med school to record, instrumental EPs while you were in your first 12 weeks of school. But, that's the first 12, right? Then you have what happens after that, which I'm assuming is all encompassing. Let's talk about your improbable facts. I use that maybe as a segue to the improbable facts. Yeah. I just mentioned your art. Again, impressive, lots of instruments that you play extremely well, including drums, piano, guitar, sing. By the way, Max, you know she had EP?
I did not.
Yeah,
okay, what are the 8 instruments? Like,
good point. Yeah, maybe do you want to use this as the improbable fact?
Yeah, guitar, piano, bass, drums. I sing.
Okay, 5.
Flugel.
What is
flugelhorn? The flugelhorn.
Okay.
Ukulele, and then I also incorporate like percussion. So like I played timpani.
Okay.
And
timpani.
I know.
Timpani is
such a fun instrument.
But it's really hard. Like I feel like it's really hard to play. So I feel like all the instruments you noted before make you perfect playing timpani. Because when I tell you, quick story time about timpani playing, because I auditioned for Allstate in high school. So an Allstate band's basically, maybe it's like the science fair thing that you talked about, but for music, right? And so you had to do sight read. And then you had to like do a bunch of different things for snare, for marimba, xylophone, and for timpani. Snare, I was pretty fine. Like I could like do stuff with. Yeah. Marimba, I was pretty fine because you had to do like all your scales, 2 octaves up and down with arpeggios and everything. And then you had the sight reading stuff, but I could get through it. It was timpani. Timpani is really hard. And when you do the auditions, you're in a quiet room with people who are like giving you the sheet music, so super quiet. And so you have like the tuning wheel. Yep. And then you're like trying to find like and then you pull it in, and then you're like, and I'm literally like trying to hit the timpani, trying to tune it. I'm like
listening a little bit, hoping nobody notices.
Yeah, hoping nobody notices. And then like and honestly, when I auditioned, I had no idea if I was actually like in tune or not because I don't have great oral skills, but it's like a hilarious experience. So it's crazy that you actually play timpani.
I'm so happy you can appreciate that one because usually people are like, "Oh, that's a cool, fun instrument."
That's
you just kind of like smack the two things.
It's like, really hard.
There are notes.
There are notes, and then sometimes you have to change the notes in the middle of a song. You got to be able to tune it while the song's going on. It's tough.
Yeah. So I'd like to improve my timpani.
Okay.
Instruments 9, 10, etc. Might be like cello. I would love to learn. One of our friends, David and Knight-Hennessy, plays cello. Recently got to hold his cello. That was very scary. So cello, violin would be cool. So strings. Okay. Oh, the organ.
Okay. Like a church organ.
Church organ. Got you. Or like just big Wurlitzer organs. So you got foot pedals. Yep. You got multiple layers of keys. And then you have the stops. And then the beautiful thing about the organ is you also have to let it breathe. The pipes. You have to also with your feet simultaneously let your instrument breathe. Brilliant.
Actually, we should do this. The end of the episode should be your cover of I Am Loving You by one of my favorite country. It's like I have a country like playlist or whatever by the Ava Brothers. Because when I saw the EP and saw the acoustic, I did. Load the car, write the note, grab your bag, grab your coat. I was like, what? Anyway, we're gonna end the episode on you singing that because I was like, this can't be Catherine. It can't be, but it was.
It was indeed.
It's crazy.
My gosh.
Yeah, we take our research seriously here in Imaginal World.
I'm impressed. Yeah, that's in the depths of the internet.
So SoundCloud. We're sorry. We'll link in the show notes. It's good. It's really good.
I appreciate it.
It's something to be proud of.
Yeah,
some early stuff. There's the 12 songs of med school have not been.
Yeah, there's somewhere.
And that might have been a different improbable fact.
Yep.
But in med school, the first 12 weeks, I took 20 minutes on a Friday night, basically wrote instrumental music. And whatever was by the end of that 20 minutes is what was established. And I have been sitting on that for...
Got to release it.
3 or 4 years now, 4 years.
Gotta release it.
And I will. Maybe for this episode, this will be the thing that kind of gives me the extra kick in the pants.
I'm not gonna lie. One of my goals before you graduate is to play with Catharine. Like, I just want to play with Catharine. I'm mostly professional, but yeah, that's become like, if there's nothing else I do before I graduate from Stanford, I must play with Catharine as an artist.
All for this.
Okay, great. We need to make it happen.
And I want to hear it.
Okay, great. Well,
on this podcast.
We did record a song with Ty Graciano live, but that was cool. But that was Taylor, and he could play guitar. Well, I know we're coming up on time here, Catherine. I want to thank you so much for just sharing so much of your wisdom, your experience, your hopes and dreams for the world. And before we actually end the episode, I want to end it on a personal note. Mm-hmm. People might not know this, but every year you have day one at Knight-Hennessy, which is like your first day on campus with your cohort. You do it in Denning. You do a bunch of fun stuff. And I remember like maybe like the week before day one, I was in a session at the business school, mm-hmm. and I was talking to some classmates about what we wanted to do with our lives and careers, because it was a career development session. Mm-hmm. And I remember someone said they wanted to go into growth equity, which I didn't know what that meant at the time. Now I do. But someone said they want to go into climate tech. I was like, cool, I kind of get that. And I remember saying how I believe that businesses cause a lot of undue suffering in the world, and how I wanted to think about the ways in which companies can mitigate like needless suffering, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember like their eyes were like glazing over, and I was like losing them like rapidly as I was like sort of going down like this articulation of like, maybe it's a premature imaginal world statement basically. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to be I want to be like a CHRO one day and like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You and I were having lunch. I forgot who else was there, but I was going through like a similar exercise with you, and you like immediately like understood like what I was trying to articulate in a way that I hadn't felt like in like my community, like outside of my family, really, like my mom, my wife, people in my family who know me like really understood that, but like without even like having much of like a precursor of our like who we are and everything, like you immediately was like, oh yeah, like I understand that, because like I did a lot of work with like transit community and like, whatever. And I just remember like there was like a way in which like you could connect to what I was experiencing and what I felt was really important to me. Incredible. That I didn't experience like, at that time at the business school. And it was truly like a hallmark moment for me of like, oh, this is a place. I'm really glad I'm in Knight-Hennessy. I'm really glad like I'm in this community, in this space, because I worry where that would have taken me if I wasn't in a place like this. So I just want to say to you, thank you for, it might seem small in that moment, but it was something that meant a lot to me and helped give me a lot of confidence in the fact that less about me belonging here and more about like the things that I care about being valued here. So I just want to say that. Thanks so much
for saying that. Yeah. I think it's also so personally like very meaningful to hear that, because in many ways our conversations have felt like that grounding point where maybe others may not understand quite the exact same thing I'm trying to articulate, but you always have. And then also, I think doubly that emphasizes the extraordinary, ordinary moment so beautifully. So thank you for saying that. And thank you both for having me on for this awesome conversation.
This has been an awesome hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Imagine the World, where we hear from inspiring members of the KHS community who are making significant contributions in their respective fields, challenging the status quo and pushing the boundaries of what is possible as they imagine the world they want to see.
This podcast is sponsored by Knight-Hennessy Scholars at Stanford University, a multidisciplinary, multicultural graduate fellowship program providing scholars with financial support to pursue graduate studies at Stanford, while helping equip them to be visionary, courageous, and collaborative leaders who address complex challenges facing the world. Follow us on social media at Knight-Hennessy and visit our website at kh.stanford.edu to learn more about the program and our community.